I feel like this is the matrix where we keep unearthing layer after layer in the story that I've been sharing for now the past 3 episodes, or today, I guess, makes the third episode. But I realized that in launching my small group social media program from seen to sold out, the 4-week Instagram mastermind, as well as being more open and sharing wins that I have been sharing with you guys lately, as silly as it sounds, I'm kind of realizing that a whole new version of me is emerging because literally up until just a few months ago, I was my number one op of discounting my own wins. A lead would come in from social media, and if it didn't turn into a client, it didn't count. Or if the project didn't reach at least X amount of dollars, it'd be nice, but I would just focus on the not enoughness. There was always something I could or should be doing more of. And there was always a laundry list of reasons why it wasn't worth celebrating now, or what I had to wait for in order for it to officially be counted as a win. And when I talk to other business owners, it's a pretty common trait because that same push for greatness and reaching those next levels is the same voice that then tells us where we are now is nowhere near good enough. And turning it back into the business, and what I think is a helpful reminder for other business owners is I used all of this as proof that my marketing wasn't working, that I was only so good at running a business and a marketing agency, as well as a lot of other really mean-spirited thoughts I would hurl at myself that I would never even think of for anyone else in this world. Meanwhile, I was quite literally blind to the fact that things were in fact working, regardless of if or how someone became a client, what the project cost, or if it was a one-time thing or a longer-term retainer client. Then scaling up from the business, I've been pretty transparent about where my head was for the first few months of 2026. And once I realized how low it really was, I knew that I needed to focus on my mindset just as much as I focus on everything else that I care about in my life. And it took about 0.2 seconds to realize that the stories that I was telling myself about literally everything was making me feel like a complete loser, no matter what anyone else said. And truly, I'd heard it all from other people, that this was just a reset period, that it was inspiring to see how I had traveled the world for most of 2025, that I was so fortunate to have a soft landing while I figured out my next move. But none of it mattered because all that I really let myself pay attention to were the awful stories that I kept telling myself about myself, which then turned into my brain constantly scanning for evidence to prove itself right. So whether it was how my marketing was performing or how my days were or weren't filled with client calls, I became completely overtaken by anxiety about how nothing was working. And if I could just figure out that magical post that would go viral or convince that one client to expand their program, then that would solve all of my problems and finally make me feel better about myself and more secure in my business. So I poured all of my effort into cracking the social media case. I'd post something I really cared deeply about and that technically hit every best practice, but then nothing. A couple hundred views, maybe 3 likes, and it was a big day if I got one meaningful comment. And then that would perpetuate that failure feeling mixed with an imposter syndrome of I own a marketing agency and I can't even do my own social media. And then it also even rolled it over into the podcast because on the first iteration of Entrepreneurship, I had more subscribers and more reviews. And actually, I think I still have like 2 subscribers and no reviews here. But so all of this compounded to make me feel really helpless and like I was just screaming into the void, just hoping that someone would hear me and maybe get something out of what I had to say. And that continued reinforcement of the story that I kept telling myself completely destroyed my confidence and my love of the business that I have been building over the past 7 years. And I know that there's plenty of you listening right now who've experienced this in some version because it's literally embedded into our human nature. So like I already mentioned, I got super focused on not just my mindset, but more importantly, the perspective from which I was viewing everything and the meaning that I was giving to the things that were happening around me. And here's what I realized. The literal events that were happening were never the problem. The problem came from the meaning that I was assigning to them because I just kept saying, look, this is evidence and proof that like not only was the thing failing and that this thing happening around me was failing, but then I was a failure because of them. And now you might already know this because neuroscience has become more mainstream in the past few years, but our brain is literally wired to prove us right, for better or for worse. It scans for evidence of what we say, think, and believe. We've all heard the example about the red Jeep. It's the same mechanism that activates when you're shopping for said red Jeep. And then all of a sudden you start seeing red Jeeps all over the road. But here's the thing. There aren't all of a sudden more red Jeeps driving around. They were always there. But because our brains are being bombarded with literally billions of pieces of information at every second, our brains have to pick and choose what they're actually going to take in, and they literally ignore the rest. So, red Jeeps prior to you shopping for one, unimportant. We can let them fade into the background. We're never even going to notice that they were there. But red Jeeps, once you start shopping for one, critical, quite literally top of mind. So your brain's going to prioritize it. Applying that to the business, my social media or podcasts were more quiet, literal proof that I have no idea what I'm doing and I'll never figure this out. So as you can see, and as you've probably experienced yourself, the stories we tell ourselves aren't small or neutral. They're quite literally the architects of our actual lived experience. So when I started playing around with it and I started telling myself that I'm always reaching the right people, you've seen what that resulted in because I've talked about it on my social media and in my podcast. Like it felt like I quite literally flipped the script and kind of found the cheat code to success. But what was actually happening was I just started noticing things more intentionally. So I started noticing the leads coming in from my marketing. I actually took the time to let it sink in that clients were saying yes after just one conversation with me. And more importantly, I allowed myself to see and celebrate every single win, regardless of how big or small someone else would count them. And this is where I really noticed the new version of Katie take shape. So real life example, I have an incredible new client. They came in as a cold inquiry from TikTok. And when I stop and think about the timeline, it's just so beautiful because they submitted the inquiry form on July 29th, booked a call for August 3rd, greenlit the program on August 10th, and we officially kicked off the project 2 days ago, Monday, August 17th. And all in, it'll be just about a $10,000 project. And that's beautiful. And I love that. And I'm so grateful. But like, here's the bigger pieces of the puzzle and where I can really start to see the fruits of my mindset labor. Because when I first sat down to start recording this episode, and when I first started talking about that win on social media, the contract wasn't signed. The first payment hadn't been made. And even now, the phasing of the project has kind of shifted a little bit, which means only $5,600 has officially been agreed to. And depending on where you are in your own business, those numbers might sound puny or they might sound massive, but that's not the important piece right now. The actual shifts that I noticed was how many times old Katie would have discounted every single piece on that path. I would have said, well, it's not the full 10K yet, or the contract wasn't signed when I sat down to record this. So they could have pulled out, which would have made this whole episode for naught. Or I'm not sure if they're actually going to follow through with phase 2. And maybe this project will just end up at $5,600. And I used to make that like, oh, well, it's only $5,600, but it's $5,600 more than I had 2 days ago. So looking at it now, it seems so silly because this is an obvious bona fide win, but old Katie would have never allowed it. Whereas now, the version of Katie that you're listening to today started calling it a win the moment the inquiry hit my inbox because someone found me through my content, which, side note, I've talked about this all across my social media. That video only got 353 views and like barely any engagement, but still, massive win. Someone found me. It resonated with them. I'm so grateful for that. We then had one conversation and they were sold, which again, something I'm so truly grateful for. And that's the real proof that things are working, not just the contract signature or the money hitting my account. It's the fact that a piece of content I poured my heart into reached the right person, even when it felt like no one was seeing it. And that was enough to get the ball rolling behind the scenes before I even knew that it was coming to me. And that's so meaningful to me. Another example prior to this client, I used to say all the time that I don't get my clients from social media. That's just like a checkpoint that I exist. I was convinced that all my clients came from word of mouth and referrals. But again, I realized that it was my mind playing tricks on me because I've literally had multiple website projects come through from complete strangers on Instagram. And yet I somehow managed to completely block it out of my memory, since that's what our brains will do depending on which story we're letting run the show. And my story was that clients don't come from social media. So obviously I can't have proof or evidence that clients were coming from social media. So that's where the identity shift lives. Because while it can still be scary at times because it's the complete opposite of my old norm, I now intentionally try to savor the small wins as much as the big ones. I allow myself to feel steady and secure in what I'm building, even on the weeks where the views are low, the followers stall, the comments barely trickle in, I'm not really getting the inquiries. Instead, I now look for evidence, even when it might look like there isn't any on the surface, that things are in fact working and are moving, and that I know in myself that no matter what's actually happening, that I have always figured it out and I'm going to continue to figure it out because obviously, duh, that's what I do. But that's again another story that I had to start telling myself. But that shift didn't happen because the external results changed first. It happened when I changed the internal narrative and then I trained myself to pay attention to the good that was already there. So I'm talking to the other Katies out there because if you are someone who pours your heart into your content, who's genuinely trying to help people and build real connection, but you feel like you're screaming into the void, the silence isn't necessarily proof that things aren't landing. It's literally just science if you take a step back and look at it. And then you get to decide what that means about your content, your business, you, if you're anything like me, and what next step you do or don't take because of what you can see happening around you. And for the more analytical people who love data and spreadsheets, firstly, I see you and I get you because I do as well. But as someone who's always lived and died by what a spreadsheet was saying, I constantly have to remind myself that our dashboards have never told the whole story because so often the most business driving moments didn't come from a spike in engagement or viewership or followers or email subscribers, any of that. It always came down to one DM, one inquiry, one person who'd been watching quietly for months before they ever said a word, or one of my current clients just having a very casual conversation with one of their friends that they then end up reaching out to me. And here's the thing, in both of these examples, it's the same pattern because regardless of what or how you're looking at something, our brain is always scanning for and catapulting to conclusions. So if it's going to do its job regardless, we might as well give it a better assignment, right? And trust me when I say that I am not saying this because I have it all figured out. Like I actually feel so far off from having it all figured out. But I am saying it because I've spent my whole life having to fight against every instinct that told me I wasn't good enough, both in life and in my business. Now realizing that I've had all of these concrete examples of how my marketing was working, even when I couldn't see it, just like the Jeep example, I'm finally allowing myself to get intentional at how I'm looking at things because imagine what will start to emerge once we finally allow ourselves to see how beautifully things are in fact working for us. And I don't want to go into this hard pitch now because this really is about the softer pieces and the mindset and the internal leadership that gets honed through focusing on stuff like this. But I do want to give you a tangible piece of the puzzle if it feels like the right next step. Because obviously, I do believe that the internal work seriously matters and sometimes could be the most important piece. But also, I think that a lot of our confidence gets strengthened when we have an actual system behind it. So, as a reminder, my small group Instagram building program, Get Seen and Sell Out, starts next week, Tuesday, August 25th. It's the 4-week live mastermind where I'm going to teach you the exact strategy behind our most successful clients and the same system that brought in these clients that I've been talking about in this episode. And as you might have gathered from this episode, this program isn't just a strategy because I can't help but go into the mindset pieces that come up when it comes to social media and putting yourself out there and having to navigate the crickets or the weird comments that we sometimes get. Because real talk, actually, fun fact, literally just a few days ago, someone left a GIF or GIF, depending on how you pronounce it, of someone pooping on one of my posts. And I low-key find it hilarious, but that's new Katie. Old Katie would have been like, what the frick? Are you kidding me? What am I doing wrong? So anyway, all that to say, if this feels like your right next step, you'll find the link in the show notes. It's $250 for the month-long program, but you guys get $25 off when you use the code OGs. So that's OGS. And regardless of if this is your next move or not, my biggest hope is that this acts as a reminder of how critical the stories we tell ourselves are. So I encourage you to ask yourself, how can you position what's happening around you so that it actually moves you towards the person you know you're meant to be? You've got this. I'm sending you so much love and good vibes along the way. And if you are joining us in From Seen to Sold Out, I can't wait to see you in there. Otherwise, I'll talk to you guys soon.